Do you want more high-profile guests to appear on your podcast? In this episode, Laura Lopez shares her proven tactics for reaching out to and booking the experts you want through cold outreach. Learn how to capture attention with an authentic compliment, clearly communicate what's in it for them, and provide social proof that sways decisions. Hello, incurable creators. I'm excited to bring you some bonus episodes featuring exclusive interviews from the 2023 PodUp Virtual Podcasting Summit. Each Thursday for months, you're going to hear interviews from a diverse range of podcasting and marketing experts. My hope is these repurposed interviews will inspire you with new ideas and insights to take your podcast to the next level. And of course, remember to listen every Tuesday for our regular episodes of Podcasting Secrets as well. Now, let's dive into today's bonus interview from PodUp's 2013 Podcasting Summit. Hello, I'm Nathan William, the CEO of PodUp and your host for the Podcasting Summit. I'm joined today by Laura Lopez. Thanks for joining us today, Laura.
Thanks so much for having me, Nathan.
Laura is a cold email and pitch expert. She's written for copy hackers, and she has grown her business using these strategies of cold email and pitching and grown her business by more than 1,400% with this. She helps numerous clients to do the same. And today she's going to talk about how we can successfully pitch guests to come on our podcast using cold email and pitching. So let's go ahead and start and just define the concept. What is cold email pitching?
Basically, a cold email is where you're sending an email to a stranger, asking them to do a specific thing. Basically, the action that you want them to take versus the action that they might be inclined to take, like ignore your email, click delete, hop on over to Instagram to check out the tab again, right? Click refresh on their Chrome, like all these other things that they could be doing. But your cold email is helping them take the action that you want them to take. So in the context of a partnership pitch where you're reaching out to someone to have a collaboration or a partnership, like when you're pitching someone to be a guest on your podcast, the action that you want them to take is obviously to say yes to your email and to come on to your podcast and be a guest.
So why would somebody want to turn to cold email pitches?
Someone would want to use cold emails to hand select the guests for their podcast. Maybe you're not getting the people applying to be on your podcast and they're not right fits. They're not the people that you would like to talk to. They're not the people that your audience is responding well to. Or maybe there's someone that you have your eye on, that like special someone that you would love to have be a guest on your podcast. Sending a cold email or a partnership pitch will let you connect with that person and invite them to come onto your podcast. So it lets you have a lot more control over the guests that you're showcasing on your podcast, which is really awesome. First of all, it's a really empowering feeling to have control over that because your podcast is very important to you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be spending so much time on it. And the second thing is that your audience will really appreciate you bringing on specific people on as guests. Maybe it's to answer a specific question that keeps popping up for your audience, like how do you do X, Y, or Z, right? And that's not something that you cover, but you know your audience is super interested in that topic. So you can invite a guest on to specifically talk about that topic.
Let's talk about that really quick. The research that you have to do before you actually invite the guest. What tips and secrets and strategies do you have about identifying the right guests and being able to find their contact information?
Yeah, so a large part of it is listening to what your audience is saying back to you from your episodes. Like if you keep getting this one question like, hey, can you please talk more about how do I post more on social media? Or how do I pitch someone? How do I send an effective cold email? Then you can use that little post, that little signpost, and start doing some research. Maybe that's on LinkedIn, and maybe you're just doing like a search across, a global search on LinkedIn that says cold email expert and seeing what results pop in. And then going through those results and seeing, does this person talk specifically about how to write cold emails in an effective way? Or are they maybe a newbie? Or are they an expert? Are they someone who could answer the questions around cold emails that my audience is having. Could they speak eloquently, effectively on my podcast about this? Or would this maybe be their first podcast? And if it is their maybe first podcast, am I okay with taking that risk? So you really have to get a little bit clear about like, what are the qualifications that I'm looking for in a guest? And then in your research, see if that person fits those qualifications, right? Is this their first rodeo? Is this their first podcast interview? If yes, am I okay with that? Do they talk about the cold email, the topic in the way that I feel okay with? Does it align with my company values? Am I comfortable with how they approach this topic? And then go from there. And then you can find their email using, there's actually a lot of ways to find their email. You can go onto their LinkedIn profile, and it usually says contact info. If you right click on that, it'll bring up like a little pop-up. Sometimes people have their email address there. You can also use hunter.io, and you can go there and plug in basically their website URL, and it will pull up any emails associated with that website. And then the third option is you can just do a global Google search for whoever it is, right? John Smith email, and see what kind of results it pops up with. Because sometimes people put their email on Twitter or inside their LinkedIn profile or on their website. So you can check all those places and then do a Google search as well.
Yeah, I love that. Great strategies. Two other ideas that I use. Often when I'm looking for guests for my show, I'll go to Amazon and I'll search my topic, and then I will find authors who've already written books on that topic. And I found a very high response rate from that. Authors tend to be very receptive to being on podcasts. And then the second one, and I did this a bunch last week, is you go find the industry trade shows related to your topic, and you find speakers who have already been vetted and selected to speak at a trade show. So you know there's a higher quality of speaker there. And then you go find their contact information and invite them on the show.
That's smart. I like that industry trade show trick. I've never heard that one before. That's really smart.
All right. So we found the people that we feel are good fits, and then we found their contact information. And now we've got to go about writing the copy that we're going to send to them. What advice or strategies do you have for us about what is in that initial message?
Yeah, so a cold email or a pitch email usually has a specific framework that I found works really well. And that framework is start off with a compliment in the top. It catches someone's attention and it helps them keep reading, which is really what you want them to do. Because if they keep reading through your email, they'll get to the call to action or your ask at the end, the destination where you want them to end up. So you want their eye to keep moving through the email. So first of all, start off with a compliment. And then work into sometimes why you're reaching out. You can say it just like that. I'm reaching out because maybe it's because, they're a speaker at this trade show and what they talked about, I think your audience would really appreciate. Be clear, first of all. Don't be obtuse. Don't be confusing. Try to be as clear as you can, because if you think about it, your recipient doesn't have a lot of time while they're reading your email. They're waiting for you to get to the point as quickly as you can and make the case for why they should say yes. So compliment, pretty much state why you're reaching out, and then ask if they're interested. If you can, provide some social proof in between of why they should consider your podcast. And this is especially important if you're reaching out to someone whose social calendar might be a little bit full. One of the bigger names, someone who might be in more demand than, say, a smaller person. So someone who's got a larger audience and maybe their calendar is looking pretty full. Seth Godin comes to mind. So why would you pitch him? Why would he want to come on your podcast versus someone else's podcast? Maybe it's that you have a really stellar rate of downloads. Maybe you have a super engaged audience. Maybe it's that your audience is really, really aligned with his topic of marketing and they would be really interested and they could be potential future book customers of his, right? Explain that. Help him understand. The main question that your cold email has to answer for your recipient to say yes is, what's in it for me? Why should I care? And it's like a basic human question. We filter almost all requests we get through this question, but it's vitally important for a cold email. What's in it for me? So you have to answer that question for your recipient. What's in it for me? Because when you do, then your cold email really works.
I see so many companies violate that rule. They try to write an email that talks about them and why they're so great and what their features are. And they completely miss that question of what's in it for them. That is the primary thing that we need to be addressed. What's their biggest problem and how are we helping solve that problem? Or what are the biggest benefits that they're going to receive, right? What's in it for them? Okay, so you talked about giving a compliment at the beginning of that pitch email, and a lot of people send me LinkedIn messages or emails, and they put some kind of generic compliment at the beginning, like, thanks or congratulations on all the success you've been having, right? But they don't know me, right? You feel it's like a cut and paste. How do we give those compliments? Can you give us some examples of how we could give those compliments and make them authentic?
I think authenticity is the hugest part of a compliment. I think that the reader can feel whether or not it's authentic. And the key to being authentic is to be specific. You kind of touched on this in your question, actually, like a generic compliment. Hey, love your success, Nathan. Great work. And you're like, yeah, okay, great. I know. But if you can be really specific and talk about maybe something that your recipient did that impacted you. Some of my best cold emails have been where I was, for example, listening to a podcast. And I was listening to this podcast in Costco. It was 2020, height of COVID. I was like masked up, hat on. I almost had the sunglasses. I was like one of those celebrities in Us magazine, right? Like, don't talk to me. I am in my own zone. And I was at Costco. It was like a Wednesday night. It was my night away from my 3 kids. My husband had the fort, and I was listening to this podcast, and I'm like reaching into the freezer to get out like frozen chicken nuggets. And what they said on the podcast had me laughing out loud, right? So that was the intro. That was the compliment in my cold email that I pitched to get on Jeff's podcast. It's The Psychology of Copywriting. And that was my compliment. I said, you had me laughing out loud in Costco because of what you said about, I think they were talking about introverts and how introverts have this very busy mental world, but we can't get it out our mouths because we're afraid of being judged. It was something along those lines. And it struck me as so true that it was so funny. And that's what my compliment was. So you can see how specific it was. It wasn't, hey, I loved your episode where you and the guest were talking about being an introvert. It was, this resonated so strongly with me that you had me giggling out loud in a COVID Costco. So to answer your question, be specific. Be as specific as you can. Tell them what kind of big ahas you got from this piece of content maybe that you took, that you listened to. Did you make any changes?
Yeah. And don't just tell them you were in Costco, but I loved how you said you were pulling chicken nuggets out of the freezer section of Costco, right? That specificity where they can visually see it adds a lot of credibility as well.
And the cool thing about a compliment is that research has shown that when you give someone a compliment, their brain responds and lights up in the same way as it would if you gave them unexpected prize money, like a reward of money. So how can you give someone that feeling, that blessed sunshine flowing down on you feeling? How can you be so specific to make them feel like that?
What if it's not someone that you know really well? I guess the solution there is go listen to their podcasts until you find something you can compliment, or go read their blog, or go to their LinkedIn page and read their LinkedIn posts. Do your research and pay the price until you find something that you can feel comfortable authentically complimenting.
Yes. And on that point too, I want to add, I recently sent a cold email and I recognized the hard work that the recipient was doing in posting videos on LinkedIn. A lot of people are scared to get on videos, and he was doing the hard work. He was daring to be visible. He was daring to be scared and do it anyway. And I complimented on him on his courage. And so can you find something about that other person where they're doing something scary and they're doing it consistently because they're probably not getting any recognition or praise for consistently showing up in that way? So why not why not recognize that for them and tell them what a good job they're doing?
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about authenticity in that compliment. Do you have any other strategies for us about how to make our pitch emails more authentic other than the compliment portion?
Again, it always goes back to answering that question, what's in it for me, for the reader, I would say. And also being as clear as you can in your email. It does your reader no good to dance around your point or, hey, I was wondering, or I know you're busy, but don't say that. Just come right out, be confident, and make your ask, because that is also a way to honor the authenticity. Like, I see that you are doing awesome work in this space. I'd love to have you talk to my audience about this. Are you interested? Be really clear.
Can you talk to us about your relevancy method?
The relevancy method breaks down to how can you be ultra relevant to your readers' hopes, dreams, and desires. So really, those are intrinsic motivators. You don't have to create an environment of maybe fake scarcity or maybe skeezy marketing, right? Or pulling on pain triggers to get them to take action. These are things that they have inside of themselves already, which are really powerful. So if you can figure out how your cold email can be relevant to what that person is dreaming or hoping or desiring, what are they moving towards? What is their big goal? That will make your cold email so much more powerful without having to employ any of those skeezy tactics where you're manipulating them, or really in the end, you kind of feel like dirty for sending this email. It's actually you, when you tap into those inner motivators, you can show up in a way more authentic way and pitch feeling really good about the pitch because you know that this person fitting in with their journey. Your pitch is like another pit stop on their journey because you know how they're motivated and where they're going.
You talked about some of those mistakes that people make where they send pitches they don't feel comfortable with. Can you talk us through what some of the biggest mistakes are that people make in these cold pitches?
Yeah, I would say the number one mistake is feeling compelled to send a pitch and then talking yourself out of it. I think if you feel compelled to pitch someone in particular, that is a signpost. That's a direction that you have to follow and that you're almost obligated and responsible to follow, because that's like your inner self guiding you to that next level of growth. Because pitching is scary. It's really scary. And speaking out and being visible triggers our lizard brain, which is that part of our brain that keeps us safe and has kept us safe for a millennia, right? It's that part that says, don't stray from the group, because of that saying, you don't have to outrun the bear, you just have to outrun the slowest person. So your brain is saying, don't be the slowest person, don't stand out, don't get separated from the group. And so that's what makes pitching scary. And that's the part that's going to talk you out of sending a pitch. But you got to take a deep breath and you got to send the pitch anyway. If you feel compelled to send the pitch, you need to send the pitch. The second mistake that a lot of people make is not being clear in your pitch. Maybe like using vague words like you'll grow, growth, or scale, or marketing, or you'll see great results. And it's like, I don't know what any of that means. Define it. Put it into concrete terms. Like, you should expect to get 20 to 30 new leads from this podcast episode. Or you should expect to get 500 new people join your email list or whatever. Or you could even say, like, on average, my guests see an increase in other invites from other podcast hosts who listen to my podcast, and they regularly get invited to these other podcasts. But really try to be clear, because that's the cold email's number one biggest killer.
That fear is a really big thing. And I think part of that is the fear of rejection. We might send out 100 cold emails and we might only get 5 valid responses from that, right? 95 people that told us no, maybe the price we have to pay to get the 5 good responses. Do you have any thoughts for us on overcoming or dealing with that rejection?
I would say, first off, your numbers don't have to be like that. Typically, when I send emails using the relevancy method, I'm usually seeing response rates of 30 to 50%. So when you do use the relevancy method, you do make your pitch stand out. You make it easier to say yes to. So you don't have to send 100 and get 95 back. But for the rejection part, just realize it's not personal. There's a lot of times that I'll get no's because of timing. A really good example is I'm sending out pitch emails right now to get booked on more podcasts. And people are saying, no, not right now. So my response is, that's totally cool. Is it okay if I reach out in 3 months? It's nothing personal against me or my topic. It's more a matter of timing, which you can't control and they can't control. So a lot of times there's more behind the no. So don't be afraid to ask just a little bit and just say, hey, I'm really curious. Was it something about my pitch that didn't resonate? Or can you lend some feedback on why you decide to say no? A lot of times people are willing to share that information. You just have to be brave enough to ask and realize that the rejection has nothing to do with you, like 9 times out of 10. It's usually just a matter of calendars booked, something's going on maternity leave, right? Like life, basically.
So why will pitching guests grow my podcast? What's the strategy behind it?
The strategy is that you get to handpick the guests that you would like to sometimes learn from, and sometimes your audience would like to learn from. So you can also take advantage of someone else's expertise on the topic to fill maybe a content gap in your podcast, like we talked about before, where your guest talks about content or a topic that you don't cover, but your audience would like to hear from. The other way is that you can invite star power guests onto your podcast without passively sitting by and hoping that they apply to be a guest on your podcast. You can proactively reach out and say, I would love for you to be a guest on my podcast. And I've heard of this working really, really well because at the end of the day, the podcast guest doesn't necessarily want to pitch. They would much rather like to be invited because it's a much easier transition for them too. They don't have to go through the process of pitching. So if you have your eye on someone that you would like to pitch, I strongly encourage you to reach out to them because they might just be waiting to hear from you.
Do you have any strategies for how we can more effectively communicate the value proposition of our podcast to that potential guest?
It definitely goes back to answering that question, what's in it for me, for your guest. So you can, if you're having a hard time articulating your value proposition, maybe you're a little bit too close to your podcast. It happens to the best of us. I would recommend surveying your audience or asking them, what's the number one thing you get out of listening to my podcast? And then using that information to figure out what your value proposition is. The other thing is your guest hasn't appeared on a podcast like yours. Tell them, articulate that, and maybe help them see how tweaking their topic in a different way could be really fun for them to talk about their topic in a new way. For example, I don't usually talk about cold emails and pitch emails in the light of pitching guests to come on a podcast. I actually don't have a podcast. I'm usually in the other side of it, right? I'm usually the one pitching to get onto a podcast. So it's really interesting for my brain to think about it from the opposite way. And so if your guest has been talking about their topic from one dimension, maybe they could talk about it from another dimension. And maybe that would be super fun for them to think about their topic in a new way and in a new light. And how can you help them see how fun that would be and to bring some pleasure back into their work like that?
Any ideas about how to leverage social proof or credibility in those cold pitches?
Yeah, definitely show your reader why it's important for them to come on your show. And maybe it's that you have great numbers. Maybe you have stellar stats to show off. Maybe it's that you know a particular person, maybe like an industry superstar listens to your podcast and is a fan. And that would help your guest, make another connection to that superstar. Or maybe you have really awesome audience members who love to share your podcast with their audiences. And so you have like that exponential reach. Think about those things when you are trying to come up with that social proof. Testimonials are also a really good spot to think about this and to kind of mine for those juicy nuggets to see what kind of social proof you can pull out that is really compelling for a guest and would make them say, yeah, I would love to be on that show.
Yeah, testimonials are a great way to help achieve that credibility. So talking about success stories and testimonials, what success stories or examples of podcasters could you share with us of those that have kind of mastered the art of guest pitching to grow their podcast?
I would say Sarah Noel Block of Tiny Marketing has done a fabulous job of this. She actually reached out to me on LinkedIn and invited me on her podcast. She did a great job with her pitch. She was clear and compelling. And then she did a great job being a podcast host. I think that might be the second component to the pitch is bringing someone on, but also doing a great job of the interview and doing a great job communicating within the interview and after the episode and how that whole process works. So she did a fabulous job of that. Another person who pitched me to come onto his podcast was Anatoly Olatovsky, and he is the host of Unmiss. He did a fabulous job of following up. And I don't see a lot of people following up on cold emails very well. And he did an awesome job. I didn't reply. I saw his email come in. I think I was out of office. And I saw his email come in and I didn't reply. And he followed up within the next 2 days. And he kept following up until I was like, okay, I'm going to check this guy out. I've never heard of him, but I'm going to check him out. And I ended up coming on his podcast purely because of his following up. And it seemed like a really cool podcast to come on. But I would never have looked into it if he hadn't followed up and kind of hounded me politely, friendly, but definitely like, hey, I do need a reply, until I finally did.
So you're an advocate of following up to our cold email pitches. How often and how frequently should we follow up?
I would say send the first follow-up within 2 days and then kind of taper it out from there, just because you don't know what's going on the other side of that computer. And so if you come off a little bit too hot and heavy, it's a little bit off-putting. So think about what day of the week it is. Is it a Sunday? Is it a Monday? Is it maybe a Friday and they're leaving the office? But also use your follow-ups to experiment with what time you're sending. A really good example is I sent a follow-up email. I think it was at like 9:30 at night. I was like on my computer last night doing emails, and I sent a follow-up email to someone, and he replied quickly within 5 minutes because I caught him at the right time when he was also in his inbox. And so use your follow-ups to experiment with what times you're sending, the days you're sending, but definitely keep in mind that people have lives going on, and also, is school starting? Is it around a holiday? That kind of thing. And think about how often would I like someone to follow up with me? Would I like them to follow up every day? Probably not. But every like 2 to 4 days, that's probably a good rhythm to find.
So Laura, thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom with us today. If our audience has enjoyed this interview and they would like to learn more about you and your services, what are the best ways for them to do that?
I actually put together a free gift for you if you're interested in learning more about what a pitch looks like. It's 2 pitch email templates, and then you get 2 real life pitch emails. So you get to see like the before and the after. And I put those together for you. You can go to lauralopez.com/pop-up to get those. And if you decide to get those and get on my email list, that's definitely the best way to stay in touch with me. If you want to work with me personally, I work with clients privately inside a group coaching/mentorship program where we work on partnership pitch emails like this. And I work with you. I give you training modules and work with you one-on-one and inside a group coaching to help you get better at pitching and help you get past a lot of obstacles, like maybe mind trash that pops up or trying to be visible, like how to overcome those things, and also the nitty-gritty of how do you actually write a good pitch? Is this a good pitch? And giving you feedback on that. And if you're interested in that, you can go to my website, lauralopez.com, and look for the Growth Multiplier Mentorship. Or if you decide to get on my email list, just hit reply to an email and say, tell me more about the mentorship, and I'll reply to you.
And to the audience listening or watching, if you have not yet upgraded to the VIP upgrade for the summit, click on the link below and you can learn more about that. For example, you can get a 14-day free trial of PodUp software just by clicking on the link below. Thanks, and have a wonderful day, and good luck with your cold pitches so you can get lots more great guests onto your podcast. Key takeaways from this episode. Number 1, start a cold pitch email with an authentic, specific compliment to capture attention and help them keep reading. Number 2, clearly state why you're reaching out to them early on. Be direct. Number 3, answer the question, what's in it for them, to compel interest. Articulate the benefits of being on your show. Number 4, provide social proof, like great audience engagement metrics or testimonials that indicate why they should come on your show. Number 5, follow up 2 days after your initial outreach, then taper follow-ups over the next week. Experiment with timing. Number 6, don't let fear of rejection stop you from pitching your dream guests. Rejection is usually never personal. And finally, number 7, survey your audience to better understand your value proposition to articulate to guests. Would you like your podcasting to be simpler, easier, faster, and more cost-effective? I recommend you check out PodUp, the all-in-one podcasting platform with more than 35 integrated modules to help you create, grow, and monetize your podcast. You can get a free trial at podup.com. Thanks for joining us for this episode. I wish you success as you invite high-profile guests onto your show.